Well, thanks to KGB for hosting this evening. And I just wanted to say a little bit about the first experience that we had when we were putting this book together. And I suppose really we had the idea for doing the book a couple of weeks after Occupy Wall Street started. And we thought, well, we better try and get some kind of permission for doing the book, because we wanted to write an instant history. But the difficulty was that getting permission from a movement without any identifiable leadership was actually quite difficult. So we talked to a few of the facilitators in Zuccotti Park, and they said that they thought the best thing to do would be to go to a General Assembly in the park, and in the announcements at the General Assembly just announce that we were doing the book and ask for volunteers. So around about the beginning of October, a few of us went down to the GA, and I was scheduled to speak. And I was feeling a little nervous about it, first of all because I'd never spoken through the people's microphone before. And it's a particular skill. You have to speak very concisely and to the point. And secondly, I was anxious because the points that I was trying to get over to the General Assembly were actually quite complicated. I wanted to say that we were going to do a book that was an instant history, that was not analytical but really descriptive, that didn't claim to be the official voice of Occupy Wall Street, but that was going to try, as we were putting it together, to mirror the principles of Occupy Wall Street, in that it was going to be participatory and horizontally organized. Anyone who wanted to be a part of putting the book together could be. That it was going to be democratic, and that it was going to be written by a collective. I was sitting on the steps in Zuccotti thinking, this is going to be quite difficult to get over to this crowd through the people's microphone. But I sort of reassured myself by the fact that it was actually a very small General Assembly that night. There were probably no more than maybe 100, 150 people at the most at the GA that night. But just before the section of the agenda that our item was to come up on occurred, Michael Moore, who was speaking on the other side of the park, finished speaking, and about 2,000 people turned around and came and sat in the square in front of us. So it was very, very nerve-wracking. Fortunately, the fact that 2,000 people came and joined the General Assembly meant that actually they never got to the item that we were supposed to be talking about. It just we waited 3 hours, and they actually still hadn't got to that item. So we abandoned it, and we abandoned the attempt to talk to the General Assembly about the book, and they said, well, actually, the facilitator said, don't worry about it, just go to an education and empowerment committee meeting, working group meeting. These were taking place in 60 Wall Street in the Deutsche Bank building, and asked for volunteers there. So we did. A few of us went along to the next education and empowerment subcommittee meeting, and that was a little bit of a fraught experience because there was a lot of support for the book, the idea of the book, in the meeting, but there was also quite a lot of feeling that it was too early to form an analysis of what was happening, and that people were worried, I think, reasonably, that we might be seen as official spokespeople for Occupy Wall Street. And actually at that meeting, we got blocked. It's the only time I've ever actually had the block. And it's not an experience I want ever to go through again. But we couldn't get it through. And so we were feeling a bit downcast and wondering whether we would just have to abandon the project. But then we noticed that quite a lot of people from the Education Empowerment Committee came up to us afterwards and said, you know what, just go ahead and do it anyway. And, you know, we'll help, we'll find volunteers for you. So that's what we did. We started meeting at 60 Wall Street every week. And every week that we met, more and more people came along. And from that point on, it was the most wonderful experience, because I think this book, you know, which I'm terribly proud of publishing, does actually represent the principles of Occupy Wall Street. It was written by between 50 and 60 people collectively. It was a pleasure going to meetings every week to discuss how we were going to do it. We went out, interviewed dozens, maybe even hundreds of people around the occupation. We divided those interviews up chapter by chapter. We allocated 2, 3, 4 writers to each chapter. The chapters came in, they were delivered on time. I can't tell you how unusual that is if you're a publisher. I mean, it's just amazing. They came in on time, and not only did they come in on time, but they were actually beautifully written. The thing about this book is that it's actually a tremendous read. It really is a great read. And it's an indication that that kind of participatory, collective work, which Occupy Wall Street represents, really does produce wonderful results. And I think it was because people imbued the spirit of what was going on in Zuccotti that the book was possible. And it really is I think it's just a tremendous achievement. I've never done a book like it before, and it really is just a marvelous piece of instant history about a wonderful time in New York City when revolution was in the air. So we've got a bunch of people here who are going to read some bits from it, and the first person who's going to read about the beginnings of Occupy Wall Street is Lisa Montanarelli.
Occupy Wall Street is part of a global movement that reached nearly every continent in the last year. Although the protests arose in different nations under disparate forms of government and varied in their demands, all have voiced outrage at the inequities of unfettered global capitalism. Unrest in Tunisia broke out on December 17, 2010, after 26-year-old street vendor Mohamed Bouazizi lit himself ablaze. Photos and videos of Bouazizi went viral on Facebook, igniting a rage of a generation of Tunisian youth and sparking colossal street demonstrations that led to the January 14th ouster of Tunisian President Ben Ali. Next, protests erupted in Algeria, Lebanon, Jordan, Mauritania, Oman, and Saudi Arabia. The first Egyptian street protest took place on January 25th. By January 31st, more than 250,000 had swarmed Cairo's Tahrir Square. In the mild winter weather, tens of thousands pitched large open-air tents, canvas or plastic sheets draped over beams. Visitors donated food to the tent city, and inhabitants of various ages, ideologies, and fashions formed committees, such as a volunteer security service, trash collection, medical services. These committees served as a template for later movements in Europe and the US. By summer, the uprisings had spread to sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, Asia, and Europe. All these protests influenced the people who later participated in Occupy Wall Street. Sina from the Press Working Group noted, for example, that Latina occupiers got a really big inspiration from less publicized movements in Chile, Colombia, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and Venezuela. But of all the protests in 2011 the massive Spanish encampments of Los Indignados, the indignants,